Hello, everybody. Okay, we made it. Welcome to the Creative Literal Side with Dean Val. I'm Dean of the Nations United University, and special guests Mike and Bob. Before I introduce Mike and Bob, let's give you an idea about what the show is about today. Now, from the personal view, the world of socialized people is mainly based upon the literalized mind. As most people have been taught according to the controlling earthly corporations, this is why the all-natural environment that supports all of us is so ruined and getting worse every day. The literalized mind has its place, but for the most part, it is always out of control and ruining something. Then it justifies itself as politicians like to do when they are caught for all the deception they like to hide. They use their pretty words to smooch people, and most people buy what they are saying while their deception and destruction continues. The masses have become literalized intellectuals and thinking that just because someone says something like, "Oh, that disaster, it will be taken care of because the president said so," or, "Oh, those chemtrails in the sky, I don't believe that they are anything because the government has not said they are." This is the brainwashed, literalized, and militarized society of today. There is a better way, and that's why we're here, to wake up and be free from all the deception. That if you have the real courage to be a real risk taker and see and do what really makes sense, very few people will do this because they are too afraid. Their literalized mind does not want to disagree with all the planned demise that they're living in because they will be thought of as different. So here we are. Now, we have two special guests every week, Mike and Bob. And Mike is a professor of common law who specializes in naturalization, individual sovereignty, unalienable rights, property titles, citizenship, and cause and effect. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Thank you.
Hi, Mike. Okay, and then we have Bob. And Bob is a air traffic controller with the FAA. He has a great love for aviation, and he has training, and he has obtained his private pilot's license in 1973, his aircraft mechanic's license in 1979, and commercial pilot's license and flight instructor rating in 1981. So again, these fellows have a lot to share today, and we're just going to let them go here. I think we'll start with Mike and see what's going on today, Mike.
Well, there's a lot of things brewing in the system, as you probably know or have heard of. The Supreme Court's moving in a direction that probably hasn't been not right. They just haven't figured out what it is. And, of course, the system is in a very interesting position to do everything it can to keep people from finding that out. Well, as I have begun my little trek through this morass of stuff, I got hooked up with the All-In many years ago. And as I began to take these little steps, which most people are mostly deathly afraid to do, which is to walk into their world. And until you do that, you're not going to be given the ability to see what's really going on over there. No way that it can be done. You can't win. You know, they give you all 100 different excuses why they won't take the step into the very place or into a world that they're afraid to go into, not realizing that there's something that takes place with them that's protecting them in everything they do, as long as they're moving in a direction that's for the benefit of the whole, not trying to take personal involvement for themselves personally, trying to protect themselves personally because it's a bigger thing. And that's part of the principle. So Bob and I, we're very closely akin to a lot of different areas. He, of course, in the Air Force side of it. I worked at a major air 5 years, so we both have a lot of things in common with respect to that side of it. The other part of it, I stepped into we'll say the reptilian side of things back in the day when I was just getting started back in 1980, and it took me in a whole different direction. It was because of that ultimately I'm not working for that company anymore. I got, we'll just say, laid off because I knew too much. And they didn't want me around people that I could have an effect over, especially at the higher level. So my walk has taken me in a whole bunch of different directions. The system, the common law, the natural, all the stuff that everybody's looking at today and having some kind of an issue with. And I was directed to take steps to find out underneath it all, find out what was really going on, why it was the way it was, and how we all came to the place we are right now. So that's kind of my opening as far as that side of it goes.
Thanks, Mike. Can I just, if you're listening, just go on mute on your phone, because sometimes we can hear people. So if you're not talking, please get on mute. Just tap the mute button.
Yeah, I'm here, Val. There was a tremendous amount of background noise. I could barely hear you speak, and that was all I could do to understand what Mike was saying, because it sounded like dishes and clacking and everything else in the background. I don't hear it at the moment. How do you hear me?
You're coming in real clear now. I think we took care of it. I think Tim was washing his dishes or something, but I think he's muted now. So you're good. You can carry on.
Okay. Well, where would you like me to start?
Well, you mentioned history of the plays into the governments going on now, and what basically the takeover that has happened with the government and the U.S. being basically used as a takeover country to take over basically the world and the resources, and making it look like they're the good guy through democracy and all that. So you mentioned being able to talk about some of the history and the background of that.
Well, before we go too far, let me say, when you introduced me, you said that I was an air traffic controller for the FAA, and that is absolutely true. I became an air traffic controller from the FAA, and I worked for them for about 3 years when I discovered my first introduction into how the legal system works or doesn't work, and how individuals are really kind of controlled and really put down by the system that's in place. And what happened to me when I was, also I should say, I went for about, from about 1985 until about 2002 without being an air traffic controller, but in 2002, I became an air traffic controller again, working for a contract company. So I'm back as an air traffic controller, but it's a contract company now. But what happened was, when I was searching for different religious truths and understandings, back in the early 80s, I became involved with a religion that believed in keeping, it was a Christian religion that believed in keeping all the Old Testament laws. And what it was a church that operated out of Texas. I'm sure if anybody did research, they could find out a lot more about it. But I was in search for the truth, and I wanted to find out what was going on, and I had been in a couple regular Christian churches, and I got kicked out of their Bible studies and ultimately kicked out of their churches for asking questions. And one of the questions I asked the churches was, the one of the commandments was you're supposed to keep the Sabbath day holy by not working on the Sabbath day. And then there's all those other holy days like, the religious holidays, which the Jews more or less keep today, or at least they keep some of them, and they don't work on those days. And I got such a strong conviction to follow that rule, I started keeping the Sabbath, and I told the FAA that I would no longer be able to work on Saturdays because of the Sabbath day, and they said, well, thank you very much for the 3 years that we've trained you, but we cannot accommodate you. And they said bye, and I said, well, goodbye, and we parted ways. And I filed a EEOC complaint with the government saying, I was always taught like everybody else that you have the right freedom of religion in this country, just, so they're not, employers cannot, they can't discriminate based on what you believe or your sex or all these different things that they list. And I figured, well, religion was one of them, and I figured, well, since now I'm a Sabbath-keeping Christian and I don't work on Saturday anymore, they should honor that. Well, after 2 years, the EEOC came back with a ruling, and they ruled that said, well, we're not discriminating against you personally. We discriminate against everybody. And I was trying to figure out exactly what they meant, and then they finally explained it, and they said, well, the way it works is this: is we do not discriminate against individuals. We discriminate against everybody. You have, and basically what they said is, we don't care what religion, what sex you are, or anything else. If you refuse to work on Saturday, we don't care what your religion is, you're fired. And that's when I learned out what the EEOC was. And that was one of the beginnings of my study into, how the government works and all the things that Mike is working on. And, and you start to wonder, well, what is this about freedom? What's freedom all about? And so it led to, I've had a lot of experiences that have led me to where I am today and my understandings of how the government works today. But, the question is, what is real freedom today? What constitutes freedom? Now, that's a question I'd like to pose to Mike. Mike thinks we have a lot of rights to be free in this country. So, Mike, why don't I start with that question with you? Explain to everybody what the real definition of freedom is.
Well,
before we get to Mike, we get to that, I have a funny story. We had this women's march here. I'm in Huntington Beach, and in Santa Ana yesterday they had the women's march here, national, and locally run. And what we were going to do is dress up as ghosts, and we're going to have a little sign saying implied freedom is a ghost, because in the United States the idea of freedom is basically implied only. It's not practiced. So we decided not to do this because it might have upset a few people. They might have thought we were Ku Klux Klanners or something, but we went with the trees and the environment. But freedom is very interesting because they talk about it, but I still need a registration for my car, even though I own it. And go ahead, Mike, you can talk about that sort of thing.
All right, well, let's get back to that first part, the rights and freedoms that most people don't even know exist. We have a unique system in this country. It's not just unique with the country, it's unique with the planet. And there are things that took place at that revolution back in 1776 that hasn't taken place in any other country on the planet. So by that first step, the people from that crown relationship that they had in England, which most of the people that are in England still have it. In fact, I don't know another country on the planet except maybe for Liberia. And the only reason that they've taken a step up is because they actually one of their representatives came here and had a long discussion with one of our early chief justices and asked them, what do we have to do to make our system like yours? And with a little bit of history, you'll discover that during the early days of our system, there were a lot of things that were going on then that are not going on now. And the gold and silver clause was in effect, the qualified elector, the freeholder status, all these things were prominent amongst the original founders, and within, we'll say, the first 20 to 25 years after that fact, they were all being exercised regularly by most people that understood what they were. Well, that act that took place with the revolution, if you can imagine the average person today in society, I don't care where it is, 20, 21 years of their life, they're actually subjects of the parent. And that's a pretty simple common law principle that exists no matter where you go. And there are some places that the government claims it has power over the child and it tries to enforce certain rules and regulations over it. But at our revolution, the people that were subjects of the king, the crown, and had to subject themselves to all of the rules of the crown, even though they may have created a bunch of common law rules in England that they really liked to apply to them, and that was the Magna Carta process. They brought the principles forward, and at the revolution, that sovereignty that they were subjected to while they were in England during that whole long time, 21, he no longer in this country has to listen or take any direction whatsoever from the parent. The parent is no longer his guardian, no longer his, we'll say it's parens patri, which that's a term that's used for the state as being the guardian over all of us as U.S. citizens in the state. And that's another term we'll get into a little later. But what happened is that sovereignty that the crown exercises freely and openly in their domain evolved onto the people here in this country. And this isn't just an opinion. This is a very limited. They never really got into a long dissertation on this individual sovereign nature. But those unalienable rights that the founders cut loose when they did the Declaration of Independence and revolted from the crown were the very elements that the crown in England exercises daily and has what, if you look at the two definitions of the two different words, the unalienable and the inalienable, the inalienable, the first part of that, actually applies to the king in England. The unalienable side, that applies to all of the people, and in this country, who are all sovereign in their personal capacity. They just don't understand how it works. They don't understand how to enforce, be an example of that, and to give other people the understanding of how it works. But the simple part of this is this. With that sovereignty, our Republican form of government was formed. They birthed a system that had nothing to do with democracy as it was understood by all the other countries on the planet. This is not a democracy. It's never been a democracy. And the founders were very, very pointed about that one fact. And any of these things that I'm giving you right now, you read the Federalist Papers at all. That was a little book that the founders put together to try and explain the Constitution and why it was written the way it was and how it evolved on the people with that revolution, brought along with it, and they list them right in the Declaration of Independence, your life, your liberty, and your pursuit of happiness. But that's not all. There's a whole bunch of other things that fall underneath the category. The problem has arisen out of people being dumbed down, their lack of understanding and education in a system where they don't know where they were birthed in the first place. And I'm talking about their status, how it was created, and what the status was as it evolved from that revolution. And that's become the great dilemma for most people. And they use the words that the system created, key words, which most people I hear come out of their mouth all the time, and they don't even know where it came from or how it was created or who did it.